African Friday, the program that comes to you every other Friday in the morning. This program looks at a number of issues concerning the lives and the people on this beautiful continent of Africa, those who are living in Africa and those who are living outside of Africa. We usually have 2 hours of discussion looking at the issues that affect this continent, its people, its leadership. Today, we may not have the 2 hours. I'm told Parliament will be coming along its way, and when it does happen, we'll let you know, and we'll give way for the Parliament to discuss issues of national interest. And apparently in the studio today, I'm having 2 members of Parliament. So from here, they will also be joining that sitting at the Parliament buildings just next to us here. Today, we are looking at the issue of climate change and its implications on this continent of Africa, specifically the issues of food security and the economy of this continent. So we in the studio, we have 2 of the experts in this area. I have Honorable Greti Chimono Chitutu, who is an expert on issues of environment, and also I have Dr. Vya Katonda, Vya Mukama, Vya Mungu, all those are the names that who will also be discussing about this topic. Apparently, both of them are 2 members of Parliament, with the Dr. Chitutu representing the women of Manafa, and the Honorable Vyakatonda representing the workers of Uganda. And in the studio again, I have Ndugu Amazima, who has also been missing. People have been asking a number of questions about where did the man go. So today we have Amazima a call in the studio, and we'll be discussing a lot of the things. Apparently, because of the time, like I said, Parliament will be coming in. We will not have a lot of the introductions, because then to eat a lot in our time. But the 2 members of Parliament and the 2 experts here are both doctors, not the doctors like one of the one said, the one of the needles, but the doctors in the respective areas. Dr. Vyakatonda is a doctor on human behavior at a PhD level, and of course Dr. Chitutu is also a PhD on the issues of environment. They have a rich background to that if we went explaining each of them and what they have done to reach that level. Today, we are looking at the issue of climate change. Of course, this issue of climate change is normally interchanged with the global warming. Sometimes people look at global climate change, but also global warming. Sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but of course they may look similar, but a bit different. But we are looking at the issue of climate change and with the implications on Africa, especially in the areas of food and the areas of economy. Apparently, when you look at the biggest polluters, the biggest countries that have caused global issues of global warming and climate change in a radical way in many parts of the world, Africa does not feature among those countries. You are talking about China, you are talking about US, you are talking about India, you are talking about Japan, and many others, the top problem causers of this world. But Africa seem to be taking even the biggest share of that. So should we begin with the Dr. Goretti? Why should Africa be worried about climate change, and yet we are not even the biggest causes of the problem?
Thank you very much. First of all, I think you started by talking about climate change, global warming. It's true, you find many times people mix up all these concepts. You find even people talking about the ozone layer depletion, mixing it with the climate science. Yeah. Now, I think maybe my colleague, being a scholar or being an academician in Gulu University, will dwell more on this. But in simple, climate change in science, we normally look at it as average weather. And we normally average it we normally use 30 years. So they look at that period of 30 years and using certain parameters, temperature being one of them. And from there, the scientists will assess to see whether there is a change.
Sure.
And truly speaking now, everybody now has to confirm that climate change is real. And we also have to also agree, like you've said, that Africa, in terms of contributing emissions, now when I talk of emissions, those are the greenhouse gases, which we all know are the cause of the global warming because of their nature. Again, that goes into the science of how they hold the heat, and then the earth, you find that it is warming. Now, warming of this earth, of course, has consequences in a way that you have weather changing, and Africa has been impacted on more. I think science says that in the last 60 years, the weather has changed drastically in terms of warming. And it is one of the continents that is being impacted on heavily, given our location on the globe. And yet, like you said, our emissions are minimal.
Sure.
Now, much as the emissions are minimal, you know, climate change has no boundaries. You may not be the cause of the problem, but you are the one who is impacted. So that's why we have that global call for all of us to participate. Even if we have no emissions, you'll find people putting in strategies for mitigation when you even don't have the emissions.
Sure.
Now, what I have to say is Africa, yes, we need to be more versatile. I've been at least attending the COPs, the negotiations,
Exactly.
and first of all, I have to commend Africa that we now negotiate as a bloc. That is at least one achievement. And as a bloc, we all negotiate as one. It is a continent. We all put our issues together.
As Africa.
As Africa. And we go to negotiate. At least I've been in several of the COPs, and I can see us making progress. But one of the areas where we need to put at least emphasis is locally. Well, we know we have a problem. Our economies are being impacted. We have a challenge of food security. All these are the impacts. Like I think in Africa, as per 2022 research, it is estimated that around 292 people are malnourished. That's about 20% of the population. And the malnutrition is coming from the agriculture, the impact on agriculture due to flooding and other impacts, droughts.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
all these, we are not the ones who cause them, but we are being impacted. Now, the countries need to be more aggressive, especially when we look at response, adaptation strategies. We are not really at it because you find that the funding in all the African countries is shrinking in terms of supporting the climate change strategy. Most of these strategies are underfunded, and at the same time, when you underfund climate change, still you will pay. You know, when you don't do the right thing, like now it is projected that if we don't do anything, by 2030, we shall require around 290 billion. That is what we shall lose. But what is required is for us to put in 53 billion to salvage that.
Okay.
Now,
if we cannot put in
53 billion, we shall lose 290
we shall put
billion.
in 200 plus.
That is what we shall lose. Because in 2022 alone, all Africa countries, we lost in terms of disaster $9 billion US.
And we can see that.
And all the countries, of course, they struggle to bring back the economies. So their GDP was affected by around 15% because we are trying to correct what we did not contribute, by the way. So you'll find that budgets are distorted. Right now we are in the budgeting cycle. Actually, we are going to parliament. But that budget will only work if we have a proper system for managing the climate change issues. Otherwise, you budget, then disasters come, and your money may be meant for a school, has to be taken to people to eat. So you find that our budgets, and this of course hinders development, because we have planned for investment into that area, but now it has to be turned to cater for correcting some of the things which we did not take into consideration. Now, I happen to have been in these negotiations, but you find that as we go ahead, countries, those who are supposed to put money for those who did not cause problems to use, it is becoming more difficult. Even when the money is put there, accessing it, the stringent measures which are put there almost make other countries not to participate in it. So my appeal to all, African countries is to prioritize funding climate change strategies.
Yeah, because
especially like in the agriculture sector, like climate smart agriculture, and in other areas. Because you don't do it, you will still pay. If you can look at the damage on roads, you see, you neglect funding climate change, or maybe just even protecting the carbon sinks like afforestation. But still you will pay when the roads are damaged, floods have damaged everything.
Homes people have been displaced.
So this is what I'm appealing to the
now,
African countries.
Before I move to Dr. Abyakatonda, in the negotiations, maybe a viewer would want to know what successes have we so far recorded in terms of negotiations as Africa? Yes,
at least the most remarkable, which took time, was for of course the panel or the whole world to accept loss and damage to be part of the financing. Okay. That took time. So most of the time people wanted to fund mitigation. Now, you know, mitigation, you are trying to reduce on emissions, but Africa has no emissions.
Exactly.
So in other words, that one we miss out. And you find that it is the people who are making business who get more, because they are trying to put in new technologies. In other words, all the money that is put there is taken by those who are bringing in technologies to reduce on mitigation.
Because there are same people who caused it
They are the same people who caused it. Now, adaptation also took time to be brought on. It was, I think, that should have been Marrakesh. At least we were able to find that. But it was, I think it was in Egypt when loss and damage was accepted.
Okay.
So I think that is some progress. And funding, of course, is still a problem. But I think Africa, I'm told, requires like, out of what we need, I think we are getting like 30 billion. But would have required, like, I think some trillions.
Exactly.
Like 1 trillion or
yeah,
so.
for Africa to have
so
that.
we are still not doing well, but we've made some progress.
At least some progress.
At least some progress.
Now, Dr. Abyakatonda, we look at some of these problems now. Of course, looking at Africa, she has elaborated as to why we, the least problematic people, are getting the biggest share of the climatic change, because we have seen all these things happen on this continent. But when you look at it, since you are an expert on human behavior, is it a lot? Is there anything? Is there something that can be done to make people be aware of the implications of the things they do, especially now in the Western world and the rest of the developing world who are responsible for this? Is it possible that Africa can push that these people also take responsibility, let alone what the damage they have done, the footprint, the compensations that can be made about the future, so that they're also conscious? Because I remember at some point at the negotiations, America, for example, did not want to to take its responsibility on the issues of pollution. And I remember one time, I think it was President Bush who was pulling out most of the programs that are related to the environment. Do you think Africa can have a sustainable way of pushing that these people also are conscious about the actions?
Yeah, thank you, James. Good morning, viewers, and thank you for having me. I think I'll just try and make some bit of correction. I'm not Honorable Member of Parliament. I'm a scholar.
Oh, sorry,
I
mistook you for another Honorable Member of Parliament, actually. Vyakatonda also? I think so.
Yes,
Okay. Yes,
my name is Engineer Dr. Jim Vyakatonda. I'm a practicing engineer. I also teach irrigation engineering and climate science at the Department of Biosim Engineering at Good University.
Oh, yeah.
So I've done some quite good research about climate science. I'll come to your question, but I wanted to pick it up from where you started, saying there is a confusion between climate change and global warming.
Global warming, yes.
There's another confusion also about climate change and climate variability. But climate change is real. We cannot run away from it.
Sure.
It's something that is with us. We have to find mechanisms of how to live with it. Now, there is undeniable evidence that from the time when recording started happening in the 1870s, there is evidence that the world has been warming. Now, some of this warming are not necessarily due to human intervention, because there's something I think people could be familiar with called El Nino and La Nina. El Nino normally brings here in Uganda and around the equator in northern hemisphere lots of rain. These phenomenon are not human induced. They actually originate from the Western Pacific Ocean. Around Darwin, that's where they originate from. And then what happens is that when this warming is in the seas and oceans, they will propagate and actually cause warming of the earth. Now, you also realize that 70% of the earth is occupied by the oceans. So anything small that happens in the ocean, any small warming in the ocean will obviously be propagated onto the earth. So more than often, we have to find mechanisms of how to live with this warming.
Yes, sure.
Of course, like the Honorable Member of Parliament was mentioning about mitigation and adaptation, I think, yes, our effort in Africa should be more or less on adaptation, because we emit less than 4% of the emissions, the global emissions. So, but we suffer the effects.
Exactly, less than 4%, which one could say minimal, but we take the biggest share in terms of disasters and the rest, and the implications and the
Yes. Now, this global warming, actually, what happens is because of the changes in temperature in the atmosphere, they cause perturbations and they cause shifts. So that's why, for now, it's not even possible to predict the onset and cessation of rain accurately because of this sort of perturbation. So we have to find mechanisms of how people can live with this kind of changes. Now, Africa, because of our not so high technological levels, we end up becoming more vulnerable than our Western counterparts who are able to cope with this. Moreover, they are the ones actually who are polluting the majority, who are contributing the majority of these emissions. And as the Honourable Member of Parliament mentioned, this COP actually, the COP, this is the conferences that happen every year on climate change. They actually platforms for negotiations where we can compel, and I think the Paris Agreement still stands out, where they compelled and countries who are greatly emitting carbon were compelled to or requested to try and make sure that they support the vulnerable countries in Africa to be able to cope with the effects of global warming and climate variability. So in this case, negotiations have to continue. We cannot deny that. What I know as of now, there is a market which I think Africa really we have to. There's a carbon market where Africa needs to get involved into. That we can link to our farmer, we can link our citizens to these markets through government, because what happens is that these heavy polluters, they are required to actually kind of offset that the carbon footprint. And
yes.
now, when they are offsetting that carbon footprint, they will need carbon sinks. And Africa, with our vast land and forests available, we can actually join these markets, because I was checking this morning, a ton of carbon at the moment goes up to about 50 euros, and 1 acre of teak tree can actually offset up to 40 tons of carbon a year. So you can imagine if I have just 1 acre of teak tree and I'm a farmer in Katakwi, in Mubende, how much funds, and I don't have to do anything other than keeping the woods there. As long as the woods are there, I can join it. So I think government really has to find mechanisms, find some framework how citizens can actually join carbon markets so that we can also benefit from this sort of funding and support that comes with the heavy polluters. Thank you very much. I think I can, let me say this for now.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. She was also saying something before I come to Ndugu call, that this money can be there for funding of these projects meant for mitigation, but accessing can also be a problem.
Yes, accessing, obviously, the local citizen in Katakwi will not have a mechanism of accessing those funds, but through government frameworks and through negotiation, like the Honorable Member of Parliament was mentioning, through those negotiations, there's a platform where government actually can negotiate for these monies, because the money is available, and there are companies, like, of course, oil companies. We have some of them here, Total, Shell. These companies are compelled to offset their carbon, and where do they offset from? So through government, actually, we can negotiate and have these carbon offsets come to Africa.
Ndugu, Cole.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ndugu Mtuta. Well, I think my submission will ideally be on adaptation. Yeah, how do we adapt? How do we live with the changes? Because my thinking is that adaptation has very much to do with mindset change. How do we change our mindset in terms of our infrastructure, both public and private? For example, when you look at the Western world, because of the winter, they build houses in a way that they are actually habitable even during winter. That is one way they had to adapt to their weather and to their climate that side. Yeah. So also this side, I think that's also the same thing. For example, we can see what is happening in South Sudan. The heat levels are actually, when you look at the heat is actually high. And the best thing is now, how do they change their mindset in terms of what they are doing in terms of like planting trees, in terms of reducing human activities, especially much as the experts here are saying that much of the disaster is something that comes to us, but also I think our own activities are not helping us to adapt. to these changes. So we have agencies, we have institutions like NEMA, we have institutions like the National Forestry Authority. So how much are they really empowered to sensitize Ugandans, to sensitize Africans? Because I believe every country has such an agency. So how are they empowered to play their cardinal role so that even they can give that information, like the information Dr. Byakatonda is giving, that there are funds, but then how to access them. So are the common people, are agencies, are the local governments aware so that they can actually mobilize people, so that they can tap into that opportunity?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll look at the other instruments and programs that for Africa, for example, what the African Union is planning in the next few years. She talked of the measure of 30 years, within the next 30 years. What is African Union looking at? If we had time, because if we had hour, 2 hours, we'll be looking at all these details. But now, given the short time we have, and I know Honorable has to go to Parliament, we'll come back to you, Honorable, and we are now asking ourselves, given that this money can be accessed for Africa to be able to replenish, including planting of the trees, but also coming up with resilient ways of managing, like he's talking about Sudan. Last time I saw people were streaming, literally boiling down with the heat. Can Africa negotiate sustainably to ensure that this money is easily accessible? Because most of this money, I'm sure, it is being passed, like the Europeans and the Americans are now doing. They pass this money through the mostly non-government organizations. But is there a way that governments can negotiate sustainably to have this money mainstreamed so that it can benefit even more people?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, I think that's an area which needs to be strengthened in terms of countries coming together, maybe through the African Union, and having a bigger voice.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is the countries go to apply for this money as individuals.
Yeah.
And the last time, you know, these are supposed to be money which is put in a certain fund, like maybe you have the GEF, that is the Global Environment Facility, then you have the GCF, and you're supposed to write project proposals which can be financed. Now, this area is where there is a weakness. I was looking at statistics, I think Asia, and I think the Asian bloc, and also I think the Latin America, they are able to access more. So they seem to have learned the trick on how to get, even some African countries, there are some who are getting more on how, like I think the last time I saw it is like when you use the highest political person, set to lobby, you'll be able to get those funds very quickly.
Okay.
But now if you are leaving a PS, I know countries which have access to even use presidents. If you make a president to get a call and rings that person, you'll be able, now for me, he simplifies his work, because I was at one time a Minister of Environment. And I remember to get, I think it should have been like 20 million or some 28 million US dollars. We passed through Foreign Affairs, and the head of state actually helped us to do, and that money came easily. But now if you are left as a minister alone, it has been hard. But countries who have learned that tactic are able to access more.
Yeah.
But I would urge Africans to lobby as a bloc.
Sure.
Such that some of these bottlenecks are simplified. Maybe if that money could be put in maybe African Development Bank, and then it becomes easier
for African
for
countries
people
to
either
access.
to go to Nairobi and they are able to get. Now, another thing which I saw was they were now turning them into loans. The money which, you can imagine, I did not contribute to emissions.
Yeah, to the
I'm
problem.
now being impacted on. But now for me to access that money, I have to go and borrow. So that's what has made many of them to
Sit back.
relax and sit back. How do I borrow? And there is also that thinking. Actually, at one time when I was a Minister of Environment, someone said, how do you borrow to plant trees? We should be borrowing for roads and what? But what you have to know, if you are not planting those trees
the road will not
as
be there.
carbon sinks, protecting the catchments, the floods alone will wash all those roads.
Sure.
And this we wonder. I remember I used to work in the National Environment Management Authority for 14 years. And some of the predictions or the projections that we made, I don't know whether they read those books. This Minister of Finance should be reading those. All these were projected through the climate change models.
Yeah,
That
because
if you
now-
don't do this, you will pay more.
But
And
you-
we are now paying more in terms of damage to roads. And when the floods come, you find gardens are flooded. Then you lose the whole harvest. Then you
but
have
you are-
to
you
get
are-
money
you're-
and you go and buy food.
You're also raising something of interest now. You caused me a problem, and you have to do good to pay for that problem. And you say, if you want me to work on that problem, then you have to come and borrow from me.
Yes.
Which money to work on a problem which you caused. Of course, we normally discuss these issues here of the double standards of the developed world. Even when you get that money, a lot of it again goes back. We're talking about the technologies. Dr. Katonda talked about the technologies, because Africa is a bit unfortunate in that area. The money that you'll get, and if you want to get any technology, you'll have to send it back to the people who gave you the money, because they're the ones who are having the technology and they're the ones who caused the problem. But I think, like you have said, this money, which he also put, can be there, but the money is like also political, because it is also attached to a number of other things, including good governance. Now they're talking about this issue of human rights, and when you don't adhere to certain values, they will definitely not give you that money. And yet the money is for the problem that you cause. Now, again, go to Dr. Vyakant. Can we come up with more prudent ways of tapping into some of these international systems to have more say than when we go for this COP? Of course, most of the time you have the structure, who is coming to say next, and then they close and then they go. Can Africa come up with a system that connects the technical people and which also taps in the political system, that we can have the voice that she's talking about?
Yeah, thank you, James, once again. Before we talk about Africa and negotiating as a bloc, we also need to be organized back home.
Sure.
In other words, climate change information is still on top there at the ministry. Does the local farmer understand what climate change means if he doesn't, for instance, put terraces in his on his farm? Do they understand this information? Once the citizens understand what climate change means, then our governments can actually already, in their own budgeting, have some base funding at local government level. Then we tell the Western world, we are already doing this, but we need support. Now, if we sit here and we start saying they are not giving us the money, it's like we are sort of lamenting. But I think we already have resources we can start with.
Yeah.
And the resources, part of the resources are actually our citizens. If they can get to know what they can do and what means if they don't do it at a local level, in a local government, when the local governments are doing their budgets, are they cognizant of these climate issues? because the information mainly is still on top. I mean, at the ministry level, at the minister, yes, the minister will go to the COP, negotiate. But at the end of the day, the information has not really trickled down.
That's true.
So let us first be a little bit organized as a nation, and then we can pick it up from there. Because if you have a foundation, I think it's easier to even now co-opt other members. Even the other nations can actually copy from you. They can benchmark from you, and you form a large block. But as the Honorable Member of Parliament did mention, we are still negotiating as individual countries.
As individual countries.
Yeah.
And of course, we have been discussing a number of issues on Africa on this forum here, and we know that there are countries in on this continent that are very naughty when it comes to working together. You will find that you are moving together, but along the way, they will go their own private negotiation. I normally name them. One of them is South Africa. Another one is Nigeria. The other one is Egypt, and also Kenya. You can sit and talk and agree, but as long as you leave the board, tomorrow you find another thing coming up. So I think, like you are saying, I think it's also a need for Africa, and we normally talk about the African Union to come up with pragmatic ways of bringing Africa together, putting this house in order. Then we can be able to negotiate, and like you said, in a single voice as the people of Africa. Other than that, as smaller countries, we may do, but may not do so much, because even if you, as a country, say Uganda, you can be secure, but as long as the neighbors, we now have, you could be talking of Congo, which should have no problem again with the environment, but you see what is happening there is definitely not the best to what the practice we can think of. So these are the issues that we need to look at. Ndugu Akolo, you are saying something.
Well, you did mention Egypt, and this reminded me one bitter reality, that Egypt has, I think, the highest number of water and environmental experts in Africa. They have really trained many of them. And what is so surprising is that whenever such negotiations are on, they always prefer undermining the rest of Africa.
Exactly.
I think that is a big challenge.
Yeah.
Like Honorable, she has been at one time a Minister of Environment, and I believe she knows very well the Nile Basin Initiative, NBI. Now, when you look at this is supposed to be an organ to help the Nile Basin countries to actually act and lobby together in terms of protecting the environment, in terms of safeguarding our water bodies. But you will find that it is actually countries like the conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia, or the supremacy of Egypt, because Egypt feels the Nile belongs to them. They're entitled to the Nile. That actually undermines the whole process. But I'd also think that as Uganda, because we sit at the source of the Nile, we have everything to learn from Egypt.
Sure.
Because in Egypt, even a nursery child knows how important the Nile is. In other words, we at the source, I believe in most professionals don't even know how important the Nile is. So as Uganda, let us understand the politics of the Nile. Let us understand because actually we are so blessed that we have so many water bodies. We have, you look at Lake Victoria, you look at the River Nile, you look at, when you come to Western Uganda, we have also a number of water bodies. So I would think that it's incumbent upon our leaders and also the framers of our education system, the curriculum, that right from primary to university, they should emphasize the importance of these water bodies, why we have to protect them, and why everybody must have at least an information about these water bodies. Then lastly, let's look at the planting of eucalyptus trees. You see what happened in River Ruiz, when actually a river drying just like that. So we should also look at these trees that are actually draining our water bodies, so that we can replace them with more friendlier trees that can sustain these water bodies, so that they can actually serve our purpose. Now, in areas like Karamoja, we can also think of things like water harvesting, actually. Yes, the water harvesting, because now you find that a whole rain season, water is wasted. It just washes, it just clears even the bridges and people cannot pass. But just a month after the rain season, now the place is dry and they cannot even get water for the animals. So we can also think of in terms of facilitating such areas in matters of water harvesting, so that we can always have the water to sustain those areas in dry seasons. You can go to Teso. You find that when it's the rainy season, there are floods everywhere. But when it is a dry season, the place is actually dry. So places like Karamoja, Teso can be empowered in terms of water harvesting. And actually that will be one of the ways we can adapt to the new climate changes.
Honorable, you have been both in the technical and also in the political. Now, do we see Africa making inroads to this in trying to bring ourselves together as a continent so that we can have a bigger voice in these negotiations?
Yes, there is that opportunity. And I think already there are some developments. But of course, like you mentioned, there are normally those outliers who normally don't want to be part of the main group. You have those, but otherwise there is that opportunity for Africa to act as a bloc. And you know, the more they act as a bloc, the better.
Sure. And
I would also emphasize what Dr. Byakatonda mentioned is countries also should also prioritize funding climate change in the budgets. We are now in the budgeting cycle. But you will find that priorities are given to sectors which are more of consuming. Now, environment is not taken as it is a resource. Because when you look at it is a very big driver. So there is need to put in money into the Ministry of Water and Environment, and you'll be able to see the benefits later. Now, he mentioned about water harvesting. I think Karamoja needs like 5 big dams. This was studied to tap that water. And that can be able to trigger the process. The same thing with the Teso. Of course, using DEM, you can be able to get those basins. And this is where it needs to be prioritized. So there are ministries which need to be prioritized. And those will trigger development into other ministries. But otherwise, if we have a small resource envelope and we are trying to spread it everywhere, we shall end up nowhere. But if we prioritize sectors which can drive others to grow, that's how we shall be able to grow as a country and attain sustainable growth.
Yeah, he also mentioned it, I think, in terms of awareness, that people may not be aware that these climate issues are important. But like the people, we are now also learning that maybe the African governments may not be as aware of the problems like their people. Now, if Africans were aware, both their leaders and the people would have had priority in environment issues, like he also talked about even the type of trees that we're planting, these gazellers, the eucalyptus and many other trees, because we could also have thought of our indigenous species may not be as bad as these other ones that we have. But also, how do now Africans get their governments to be environmental conscious, but also the governments get their people to be environmental conscious? Because it's a two-way thing now. Government has to put in a lot of money in the environmental issues to ensure that in the next 30 years, we don't pay more, we don't we don't lose, because other than paying more at the end of the 30 years, you have also lost, like she put it, some more money along the way. Can we have a way of bringing us together as the people of Africa, the leadership of Africa, that we can be, first of all, aware, like he said, but also to be able to push for the things that can help Africa to get out of the problem. But even if that does not happen, or if it happens at all later on, can we, if that does not happen, for example, what are the issues that we are looking at for Africa? Because we're talking about the food, but also talking about the economy. If that does not happen today, are we not running a very big risk in the future?
Well, maybe since I'm in government, of course the risk is there. And you know, when you cannot have economies sustaining themselves, of course you're already running a risk. That means you will end up having more debts to sustain the economy. And yet, if we had a balanced way of planning, this is where we like he said, there is need for a lot of sensitization. I remember at one time when we were ministers of environment, we wanted to have that strategy of sensitizing our presidents, but it's not very easy.
Yeah.
And you know, even when you are in government, there are ministries or ministers who are regarded big boys, and then those whatever those ministries who really, even you see, when
Sure.
they speak, they say, oh, it is that one ministry. And yet, these ones who are being sidelined are the ones which are causing more. So we really need to understand that.
Okay.
Through benchmarking in other countries. Like if you go to the country like Norway, when they are dividing their budget, you as a minister, you have no control over that. It is the scientists, the economists who sit on those models,
Yeah.
and they will say, okay, we want a growth of this. So what do we do? So it is the models which we say, okay, put more money in this, but then they have certain indicators which they monitor, maybe GDP, access to safe water. So those key indicators which they will never see go down. So for you as a political head, you are only given what you have to drive.
Yes.
And remain in your lane.
And
But otherwise, where we are, you leave all of us. Every minister knows that he or he is very important. So when you are in the budget, everybody struggles to make sure,
the money
and
comes.
which is not right. And that is being done in Africa.
Sure.
So like he says, we need a lot of sensitization, and we don't need to continue doing things as usual. We have to go on the drawing board and begin planning strategically. Otherwise, we are likely not to achieve what we are looking at, like reaching the, we are now under which word, first, to be called a first world country.
Yes.
You really need to really be
The
on
middle
path.
income. to
Yeah,
reach the
middle income. I don't know those incomes until you're
Now,
on the
yes,
highest.
Doctor, you talked about, we are now getting back to you, because there is a claim that the academicians, the elites of Africa are the ones who actually have let Africa down. Now, she has raised the issue of the technical, the experts who whose information is actually supposed to inform the way governments are run in terms of budgeting, in terms of policing, in terms of the whole management of a government. Do you see yourself and many other colleagues in the ministries in the education sector, where the experts, what should we do to ensure that the voice that we present is heard, that our governments are also responsive to the issues that the technical people and the experts raise?
Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you, James. First of all, there's a lot of information that is being generated, and a lot of knowledge that's being generated from academic institutions. Now, like the Honorable Member of Parliament did mention, the Honorable Member of Parliament did mention that in other countries, when they are planning, actually the academic world, the experts,
Okay. We shall come back to Dexter's point. I've been told now Parliament is on, and like we said, when they happen to start, we'll give way for the programs of Parliament. So until next Friday, we shall be getting back with the same experts, and they will be taking us into what we can do as African people to be sure that we survive on this beautiful continent. Until then,